On December the 12th, voters will go to the polls to decide who represent them in Parliament and who will lead the country at this critical time in our history. So what's the truth behind the competing visions of the parties, and what do their plans mean for you? Tonight I'm joined by the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, Joe Swinson.
Joe Swinson, can we agree to conduct this interview on the basis that you will not be the country's next Prime Minister?
Well, I would obviously love to be Prime Minister. Clearly, when you look at the polls, that's not the most likely scenario. I will certainly grant you that. But I'm very glad to be standing up for the millions of people in this country who want to remain in the European Union. And the more Liberal Democrat MPs we elect, the more likely we are to be able to stop Brexit. So
it follows then, does it not, that the central pitch which you launched this campaign on, that you would reverse Brexit without a second referendum, that falls away since that needed a Lib Dem majority government?
Well, we've set out very clearly that we want to stop Brexit and every scenario how we will try to do that, and that obviously we will keep campaigning for a people's vote.
Right, but you are campaigning for that now, because since you've admitted you won't form the next government.
There's 8 days to go, but it looks like that's the more likely.
Not revoke Article 50 and stop Brexit without a referendum.
We've always said that we would want to do so through a democratic means, whether that was through an election or whether it's through a people's vote on the specific Brexit deal. Liberal Democrats have led that campaign. We came out immediately after the 2016 referendum and said we thought the specific Brexit deal should be put to the public for a final say, and we'll continue to do
So it's a second referendum you're looking for now?
We'd like a final say on the specific Brexit deal.
But given that your campaign has somewhat floundered, was it not the height of folly to position yourself at the start as the next Prime Minister, seeking a mandate to revoke Article 50 without a referendum? Weren't these two major mistakes?
I disagree. I think when you look at the beginning of this campaign and over the summer, we had 4 parties all around 20% in the polls, which in a first-past-the-post voting system creates a huge amount of volatility and uncertainty, and also, yes, opportunity to shake things up and change things completely. And I still am about changing our politics because I believe it should be better.
It's just not going too well, is it?
Well, clearly the deal that was stitched up between Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson has been significant in how this election has gone. It's made things much more difficult electorally, but I'm proud of the campaign that we've been fighting. I'm proud that we're sticking to our position of stopping Brexit, and we've got Liberal Democrat campaigners and candidates in positions to win seats from the Conservatives right across the country.
You're not sticking to your position. You're moving from revoking Article 50 to a second referendum, and you began this election campaign as a relative unknown. Why is it, do you think, that the more voters got to know you, the less they liked you?
Well, let me just be clear about what our position was as passed at our conference. It was to revoke Article 50 to stop Brexit in the event of a Lib Dem majority government, and in every other circumstance to keep campaigning for a people's vote. So there is not a change in that policy. The policy is the same.
So why is it that the more voters get to know you, the less they like you?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I've seen some polls that say things slightly differently to that. But do you know what, Andrew? I'm in this election, I'm in politics because I want to change things. I want us to remain in the European Union. And I'm going to stand up for those things that I believe in. And even if, people say, well, if you said this, or you did this differently, or you said you believed something else, maybe that would make a difference. I mean, I'm about changing things, and I'm going to stick to what I think.
At the start of the campaign was -20. It's now -31. Your approval rating's even lower than Nigel Farage.
Look, I'm not, at the end of the day, I'm going to stand for what I believe in. And there will be people who dislike that, but I'm not going to say, well, let me just have a kind of message that's full of mush. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's not saying where he stands on Brexit, and I'm proud to be able to be clear that I think our best future is in the European Union.
But it's because of what you have said that your unfavourability rating has climbed by 20%, because even staunch Remainers regarded revoking Brexit without another referendum as unacceptable.
Well, I've seen different polling that says from YouGov in just the last few days that most Remainers actually support our policy of revoking Article 50.
Vince Cable doesn't. Your predecessor is head of the Lib Dems. He said your revoke policy was, quote, an unhelpful distraction.
Well, I disagree. I think it was the right thing. Most Remainers do support it. It's something which is certainly going down well in many parts of the country.
But I've spoken
many
to
of
your
our
candidates, Lib Dem candidates, on the doorstep. They don't talk about revoke anymore. They talk about a second referendum.
Well, we're talking
and yet
about,
revoke was your flagship policy.
We're talking about stopping Brexit, whatever the route is to do that. It's the exact same as we were talking about in the European elections that saw us win 16 MEPs, beating both the Conservatives and the Labour Party. And we're going to stick to our campaign to stop Brexit because there's so much at stake for the future of our country.
But your position has been to cast the Lib Dems against Mr Johnson and Mr Corbyn as moderate, as reasonable. Vote for you because of that, not for them. But this revoke Article 50, no second referendum, that made you, in the eyes of many, extreme and undemocratic.
Well, I mean, I would take issue with that description of our positioning. So, I mean, certainly when it comes to, our economic plans, we care whether they add up. Others, have kind of, thrown that out of the window.
I mean, on the Article 50 revoke.
But on the issue of our relationship with the European Union, you've got, Jeremy Corbyn, who's refusing to say where he stands, wants to negotiate a Labour Brexit. You've got Boris Johnson, who wants Brexit to happen. We are firmly on the other side of that divide, of, what our vision is for the future of our country and our relationship with the rest of the world. It's an open internationalist position.
Let me tell you why people regard it as undemocratic. 3 years ago, 52% of this country voted to leave the EU. But you were proposing to reverse that, heading a government which almost certainly would have been elected in a lot less than half the vote. It was undemocratic.
Well, Andrew, you're not going to find more strong supporters of changing our broken voting system than Liberal Democrats. I've campaigned to change our voting system for the last 20 years.
But you were going to reverse Brexit on what you call the broken voting system.
We work within the system that we have, and any government in our country works on the basis of trying to get a majority and then implement their manifesto. So yes, I'm going to keep campaigning to try to change the voting system. But in the context of the system that we have, I'm also going to stand up and give people a chance to stop Brexit.
Right. But your manifesto says that electing a Lib government is the only way to stop Brexit. But even you no longer believe that.
It's the only way to guarantee it in this election. So,
But it can be stopped in other ways now.
Well, it may be able to be, and we will try to do so.
So it's not the only way.
It's the only way to guarantee it in this election.
Well, let's look at how you might get that referendum if there's a hung parliament, because that's probably your best hope now. You've ruled out working with both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn in a hung parliament. So what would the Lib Dems do if there was deadlock? You just sit in your hands?
Look, we work with other parties all the time.
But you said you won't work with them.
I've said Liberal Democrat votes aren't going to put Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn into number 10. But will I work with Labour MPs? In fact, have I been working with Labour MPs and Conservative MPs and SNP and Plaid Cymru and the Green MPs and Independent MPs to try to stop Brexit? Yes, if you look at what we've done in the last 2.5 years, we have worked together.
Would you work with Jeremy Corbyn?
Just to finish that point, have we stopped Brexit? Yes, we've stopped Brexit twice already, and if you have more Liberal Democrat MPs in the next Parliament, we can stop it for good.
Would you work with Jeremy Corbyn to stop Brexit?
Will I vote for a people's vote, which I hope he will, vote for? I mean, to be fair, let's face it, his record is not great. We've tabled amendments 17 times. And
but you would help him to get a people's vote?
If Jeremy Corbyn had supported our most recent amendment on a people's vote, we might have been having a people's vote instead of a general election right now. But, yeah, will I vote for legislation for a people's vote? Yes, I will vote for legislation for a people's vote.
But in a hung parliament, a new government can't deliver another referendum for at least 6 months. It would need to pass a Queen's speech. It would need to pass a finance bill because we'd be into the new financial year. At the very least, you'd have to abstain, or you might have to vote for these things to get to that referendum under a Corbyn government. Are you prepared to do that?
Look, we don't know the results of the election.
But you know what I'm saying.
We don't. Look, to be honest, if Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn don't win a majority at this election, then there's no guarantee that they're still going to be the ones that are leading their parties a week afterwards, right?
Sure.
So Liberal Democrats will work to stop Brexit. We will support legislation that puts in place a people's vote, and we will work across party.
And you would keep a Corbyn government in for long enough to deliver that second referendum.
Look, I've been really clear about this. Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, neither of them are fit to be Prime Minister. I mean, we saw you very powerfully put Jeremy Corbyn on the spot about his actions on anti-Semitism. I hope you get the chance to put Boris Johnson on the spot, but sadly at the moment that's not looking particularly likely. But the truth is that neither of them are people who I think, many in this country actually would like to see in those roles. So, will I work?
But that might be your only choice. The Corbyn government, minority government, needing your support to deliver a second referendum. That might be your only choice. What would you do?
I will vote for legislation to pass a people's vote. Of course I will. And I would have done that under the previous Conservative government, just as I would do it under any other government. But I will work with people on a cross-party basis. If we can elect enough MPs who support a people's vote, then we have the chance of delivering it. Liberal Democrat MPs are the strongest advocates of Remain.
So it's not beyond the pale, then, that you would work with a Corbyn government?
I'm not going to put Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, but if a government of any colour puts down a bill in Parliament to have a people's vote, then we will support having a people's vote to put a specific Brexit deal to the people with the option of remaining in the EU.
What if Mr Corbyn needed not just the support of the Lib Dems for this second referendum, but he needed the SNP too? And the SNP said, fine, but we want a second Scottish referendum. What would you do then?
Well, I'm not going to support another referendum on independence. We know last time we had the referendum on independence, the uncertainty that it caused for Scottish businesses and for the economy. And when you look at all of the mess of Brexit right now, the last thing we need in Scotland is more chaos on top of that existing chaos.
I understand that. So you would sacrifice a second Brexit referendum if it came with a price tag of a second Scottish referendum.
Look,
is that right?
No, the SNP say they want to stop Brexit. So the SNP, I put it to you, are not going to...
I'm not asking what the SNP is saying.
What are they going to do? They're not going to support having
What would you do? Would you pay the price of a second referendum in Scotland?
I'm not going to support a second referendum in Scotland with all the extra chaos that brings.
I understand. Even if that meant you didn't get a second Brexit referendum?
I will vote for a people's vote on the Brexit deal. And I think SNP members of Parliament will also vote for that legislation because they will know that that's what people in Scotland want.
Your manifesto is clear that you want 16-year-olds to have the vote and EU citizens to have the vote. Would they have the vote for a second Brexit referendum?
I would very much like them to have that, yes.
And even if it meant delaying the referendum a bit to get the legislation through to do that, you would go along with that?
Well, I think it's possible in discussions that I've had about how we could do this swiftly. So, for example, it would be possible to pass a law to extend the franchise to 16-year-olds. It's easier with EU citizens because they're already on the voters' roll. But with 16-year-olds, you could pass a law to extend the franchise, and that obviously what is required is that the electoral registration officers do the canvass.
You want it. If it can be done, you want it. Yeah. But you see, a lot of Leave voters will say to you, you're fiddling the franchise now to get the result you want. You're not fighting it on the 2016 referendum basis. You're changing it to give your side a better chance.
I've always supported votes at 16. That's not a new position. And indeed, we have votes at 16, as you know, in Scotland, where for local elections, for Scottish Parliament elections, for the independence referendum. And you know what? The sky in Scotland is still there. I mean, it's sometimes admittedly a bit grey and rainy,
I'm not arguing the case
there.
for or against 16-year-olds. That's your position. I'm just saying that Leave voters would see it as a fiddle. And look at what Mr Corbyn's trying to renegotiate. Remain in the customs union, remain in the single market, stay fully aligned with all EU rules, probably free movement continuing as well. Leave voters will say, hold on, that's not Leave, that's a version of Remain, and you fiddle the franchise, we're just not going to have anything to do with this referendum. What would you do?
Well, look, I want 16-year-olds to have the vote, and let's be clear, I've always wanted that. That's a consistent position. And
but what would you do in these circumstances?
That generation are going to be the most affected by the decision on leaving the European Union or not.
I'm not arguing with you about 16-year-olds. I'm talking about what may happen if you go down this road. Because it could be that a vote for the Lib Dems in these circumstances would be a vote for chaos.
And I disagree.
What, if the Leave side decides it's just going to boycott the referendum?
I think that in having a people's vote, the most sensible position to put to the public would be to put Boris Johnson's Brexit deal to the public against the idea of remaining. Boris Johnson's deal has got advocates who are Brexit.
But that's not what Mr Corbyn's proposing.
No, I mean, none of us really know what Mr Corbyn's proposing because he's offering everyone a free pony, frankly.
Supposing the worst happens from your point of view and Brexit does take place, would you immediately start a campaign to rejoin the EU? I mean, I know you're always going to be in favour of it, but would you immediately start a campaign to rejoin?
Look, I think our best future is within the European Union. I have not given up hope that we can stop Brexit.
But if we leave, would you campaign to rejoin?
We've not left, Andrew. We were supposed to leave twice this year, and we haven't. And I'm working to stop Brexit. And
no, I got that. Okay, you're not going to answer. That's fine. Your manifesto says that you want to be at the heart of the European Union.
Yeah.
But the heart of the European Union is economic and monetary union. So would you be prepared to join the euro?
I don't think we should be joining the euro. I think being at the heart of the European Union, I do not interpret in the way that you have just described it there. I think that's about us playing a leadership role within the EU. We've done that on so many occasions. If you look at the climate talks, the Paris Accord, the UK played a leadership role getting the EU to adopt an ambitious position, and then the EU managed to get the world to adopt an ambitious position on the climate emergency. That's the kind of thing about us being at the heart of the
but
EU.
You can't be at the heart of the EU if you're not a monetary union.
No,
That's where all the talks about future integration are taking place. That's the whole dynamic between Paris and Berlin. You can be in the EU, but you cannot be at the heart of it.
I disagree. I think, and this is, in a sense, one of those myths. Actually, the UK has played and is a key leading role in the EU without being in the euro, with all of the bespoke deal that we have, with the rebate, with the various opt-outs. Actually, we have a brilliant deal as members of the European Union.
Right.
And I think we are at the heart of the EU, and we should stay there rather than giving up that international influence and heading off to stand alone and, isolated.
You obviously want to stay, and you think if we do, there'll be what you call a remain bonus. More money to spend on public services based on economic forecasts, which would assume a bit of a higher growth than if we were to leave.
Yeah.
Now, 3 years ago, we had several economic forecasts about what would happen if we voted to leave. Which ones were correct?
Look, there's lots of forecasts that are there. You're going to have some in front of you that you're going to tell me some various figures. But what I would say is that we're not basing this on solely one piece of information. If you look at the broad range of economic analysis, including the government's own analysis, sometimes the specific figures vary, as you would imagine, from different economists, but the direction of travel is clear. Staying in the EU will be better for our economy. There will be more money to spend on public services.
But you need the faster growth to get that extra money to spend. If it doesn't materialise, if the forecasts are wrong, and a lot of them have been, you don't have that money.
Well, let's be fair, we have also been cautious. So the IFS forecast suggested that growth would be 2.1%, whereas we've got a figure of 1.8%.
Right.
And we're also being, if you like, generous to the leave side, because we're assuming that it would be 1.4% in those plans, though actually there's plenty of circumstances where it would be much less than that.
You don't generate the extra revenues, agreed?
Look, every single government...
Your figures depend on forecasts.
Every government's figures depend on forecasts, as you well know.
The remain bonus, 50 billion.
Yes.
Is what your forecasts produce.
Which the independent IFS say is, makes sense.
But I'm looking at the cost and spending
reasonable
plans that your party has published for the middle of the next decade. How much is the remain bonus in these figures?
Well, it's 50 billion over the course of the Parliament. In the final year, it's 14 billion pounds.
Right. So 5 years in, it's an extra 14 billion a year.
Yeah.
It's not 50 billion a year.
We've been very clear that it's 50 billion across the Parliament.
So it's misleading, because you've often implied that there'll be 50 billion more to spend, but in the middle of the next decade, the real figure is 14 billion.
We are setting out our plans for the next 5 years, and in the course of that 5 years, there will be 50 billion pounds extra. Right. It could be more than that, absolutely, and we've taken a
But
cautious
the impact
estimate.
is an extra 14 billion by the middle of the decade. That's it.
In the fifth year, and of course,
if you get the growth,
and of course, which, as I say, every forecast is based. Every spending plan is based on a degree of forecasting.
But yours is based that we stay in the EU. What's our growth rate at the moment?
Well, the 1.8 is actually pretty much.
No, at the moment.
Well, so it's pretty much what it has been for the last few years.
It's just over 1%. What's the Eurozone's growth rate?
I don't have the figure to hand.
It's just over 1%. And last time I looked, the Eurozone hadn't left the EU.
Sure.
So it doesn't follow if we stay in the EU, the growth rate will be higher.
Well, it doesn't. It does follow that if we leave the EU, the growth rate will be lower, because our economy is not the same as the EU's economies. We will be turning our back on our closest trading partners. We'll be putting up barriers. We'll be creating much more uncertainty for business. We'll be making it harder for companies to export. We're going to be spending years in trade deal negotiations. Yeah,
I know you're assuming the faster growth if we remain, and many forecasters do. I understand that. Let's turn to other things in your manifesto. You're proposing to scrap the so-called bedroom tax. Who voted 9 times to introduce the bedroom tax?
Liberal Democrats in government, including myself.
That would be you.
Yes. Which I have previously said, and I'm happy to say again, was wrong. And I'm sorry about that. And it was one of the things that we did get wrong.
You're proposing to scrap the benefits cap.
Yes.
Who voted several times to introduce the benefits cap?
I will have done, as someone in collective responsibility in government.
You want to roll back the health reforms that allow NHS contracts to be put out to private tender. Who voted 3 times for these reforms?
I was in government, so I
that would be you. So why should people believe you this time when you're responsible for these things?
Well, we're setting out what our plan is for the future. We did spend 5 years in a coalition government where Clearly, we didn't win every battle against the Conservatives. We fought many battles, and we did win battles for more money for schools, for more money for the poorest pupils, for managing to cut tax to the lowest paid, to introduce same-sex marriage. There's many things that I'm very proud of and where we made a difference. But of course, there were things where we didn't win those battles. And I'm sorry about that, but it was not a Liberal Democrat government, it was a coalition government.
Yeah, but you voted for them. You say we made mistakes. But what about the people who are on the wrong end of these mistakes? Often the poorest and the weakest in our society. 240,000 people had their benefits cut because you went along with the bedroom tax. Would you like to apologise to them today?
Yes, I am sorry that I did that. It was not the right policy, and we should have stopped it. And our manifesto, as our previous manifesto, makes clear that that should be scrapped. And we have identified the money to put into it, and not only the bedroom tax, but scrapping the 2-child limit, which was introduced by the Conservatives, which we did stop in government, but was introduced by the Conservative majority government after 2015, and to put £6 billion into the welfare system, which would also make universal credit.
In many ways, you're just reversing things you voted for. I mean, childcare is one of your flagship priorities, and you've got a lot in the manifesto, £1 billion a year more. How many Sure Start centres were closed when you were a government minister?
I don't have the numbers, but
the
money that
over 500.
The money that we are putting in,
maybe a lot more
than replaces the money that was cut.
But you didn't. You cut the Sure Start centres.
And we are
voted for it.
And we are identifying more than enough to put in. And when it comes to childcare, our biggest item within the manifesto spending plans is to help families who are struggling with the unaffordable cost of childcare by making sure that we can expand the number of hours, that we can expand when it kicks in, so that people don't have to wait until their child is 2 or 3, they can get it at the point at which they think of going back to work.
But you will understand how people watching this, seeing your voting record in the past to do all this, now saying you're going to reverse it all, will think, hey, why would we want someone who's responsible for these things in the first place?
We were in a coalition government.
I do know that.
You know, many of these things were a decade ago. We have got a plan for the future which identifies what a Liberal Democrat government would want to do, what our priorities are on childcare, on education, on mental health, on tackling the climate emergency. And I encourage people to look at those plans, to recognise that we are being upfront about where we would get the money to pay for it, which you can't say about all the parties right now.
No.
And that is the platform that we're standing for, and that we're asking people to support.
But when you look back now, was austerity a necessary evil or a terrible mistake?
Clearly too much was cut, clearly not enough was raised from taxation, and certainly the investment should have kicked in earlier in terms of more borrowing for capital investment. Equally, we implemented pretty much what Labour's proposed spending plans were from the 2010 election. And I'm not going to say that in a financial crisis that it was going to be possible with the deficit at the level that it was in 2010 not to make any cuts at all.
So was it a necessary evil, unpleasant, difficult to do, but it had to be done, or was it a mistake?
Some cuts were necessary, but the shape of those cuts, and certainly the balance between cuts and tax rises, I don't think was the right balance. I think we should have been raising more from taxation, and that's something which we argued for, and obviously that was one of the things that was not one of the battles that we always won during coalition.
But you see, you haven't quite shaken off austerity, have you? Because you're aiming to run a 1% surplus on current spending, day-to-day spending, just like austerity George Osborne, the former Chancellor. I guess it's not a surprise. He's thinking of voting Lib Dem.
Well, he's got a fantastic Liberal Democrat candidate in his seat in Sam Juma, who will be
is
an excellent Lib Dem, has been an excellent Lib Dem MP, and I hope will continue to be. Look, by aiming at that 1%, and by the way, it's a flexible plan. It includes we can go into a 1% deficit. Then that gives the best chance of balancing the books. But remember that our plans, because we're not going to cause that huge economic harm of leaving the European Union, mean that we would have more money to spend than the Conservatives. And, Labour, frankly, they write a big wish list of promises, but I don't think anybody watching really believes that they're going to be able to deliver all of that, because they're not saying where it will come from. And you've got to be open with people about where you're going to get the money to pay for things.
How well do you have to do on December the 12th to keep your job?
I've just been elected as leader of the Lib Dems in July by a pretty overwhelming majority of Liberal Democrat members.
But a lot of you members don't think this campaign has quite gone the way it should do. So how well do you have to do?
Look, I'm staying as Liberal Democrat leader, and I'm excited. Really? I'm excited about the movement, the Liberal movement that we need to build, because we still need to make sure that we can stop Brexit. And there is something bigger at stake here as well, even than that. It is about who we are as a country, whether we are open, whether we are inclusive, whether we go down the route that you see in America of populism and nationalism. And it's liberalism that is the answer to that. And that is the Liberal movement that I'm building.
So if liberalism is the answer, and you seem to imply its time has come, you've got into this election with 21 MPs. You had 12 from the last election. You had a number of defections. If you end up with fewer than 21 MPs, will the Joe Swinson reign be short and not so sweet?
Look, I'm confident we're going to win more seats, and I'm continuing as Liberal Democrat leader,
regardless of the result.
Look, I've got a job to do, and I've just been elected to do it, and I'm excited to be fighting this election. And in terms of that wider movement, we have more Liberal Democrat members than ever before. We know we've got a voting system that is a strange voting system, and that can
so you're here
you
to
can
stay.
come out. I'm absolutely
regardless
here to
of the
stay.
result.
I'm here to stay, and we're going to get a great result.
Joe Swinson, thank you.
Thank you very much.